Good morning, everyone. Would you love the new podium?
Yes.
The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Mark. Jesus and the disciples passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And after 3 days, after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying, and were afraid to ask. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them what they were arguing about on the way. But they were silent. For on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all, and servants and all." Then he took a little child and put it among them. Then taking it into his arms, he asked them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord.
This past week, I went to Artesia to attend a funeral for a dear friend of mine that I've known and loved for over 20 years. And when I approached the church, I noticed that since the last time I had been at that particular church, they had added a larger-than-life bronze statue that in and of itself was a magnificent piece of public art sitting out in front of the church, in front of their big life center over there. But as I got closer, I realized it was an image of Jesus Christ crouching down, welcoming children. And I just stopped and I had to reflect and pause on that image because the artwork itself was so magnificent and the visual sermon spoke volumes. In fact, it probably said more just in that one work of art than I could say in the next few minutes because it was so powerful. But it reminded me of the prominence of this scripture, and I was privately rejoicing as I looked at this sculpture because I knew this was the lectionary reading for today, and it was just felt like a gift from God. You know, when Jesus was teaching and preaching and healing and ministering, children were basically treated as less than fully human things that could be possibly seen but not heard. The only individuals in society that really had a voice or that deserved to be heard were prominent men. Women second, and children last. And you know, we see this played out in Scripture when Jesus was teaching and the children were coming up to talk to him and the adults were saying, "Oh, no, you need to stay back. Don't bother the teacher. Don't get in his way. He's more important than you are." And Jesus said, "Oh, no, you guys got that backwards. Bring them to me. Gather the little children unto me. For it is unto such as them that the kingdom of heaven belongs." And in this passage, we see it also played out that Jesus is using this illustration of taking the least important in society and elevating them to the place of greatest prominence. In our world today, it's sometimes hard to really fully grasp how radical that was. But it's also important to see why it became necessary. The disciples were arguing with one another. Who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? We had this conversation the other day in Bible study. We were talking about it, and for those of you who are at Bible study on Wednesday, you'll remember this. But the difference between confidence and arrogance. You remember this? And we're drawn to a confident person because they're attractive. Not necessarily physically attractive, although they can be, but their personality is attractive. They draw people to them. People want to be around them because their confidence just quietly radiates outward. But most importantly, a confident person doesn't tell you they're confident. It just naturally is evident. An arrogant person, on the other hand, is one who has to tell you how good and wonderful and awesome they are, because inside you're usually a broken, a shattered human being that needs to put out this facade of greatness because they don't feel it inside, and they're always pushing that greatness. And the arrogant people, they're the bullies. They're the ones that are pushing people around and strutting their stuff and showing how good they are and telling everybody how awesome they are, and you better love them because they deserve it, because they're just arrogant. And, we don't want to be around people like that. They're off-putting. They turn us off. But this is kind of what the disciples were doing. They were like, well, I'm this way with Jesus. I've done this. I've learned this. I'm all this. And they're sitting there privately arguing with one another, who's the greatest? And I can hear this conversation because they're probably comparing notes about who's closer to Jesus, who knows more about what his favorite foods are, or who was there when he did this, and who wasn't there when he did that, and who's going to be the most important. And they're just strutting their stuff and kind of nudging each other and making sure that the other disciples know that they're the ones that are going to be in charge when it's all over. Their arrogance, born in their narcissism and their insecurity, was preventing them from seeing the truth of the gospel. Jesus was telling them, look, folks, my path is death. My path is torture. My path is rejection. The greatness that will come from the Messiah is one of sacrifice and service, not one of posturing and power in the worldly traditional sense. You got to remember, they wanted a Messiah that was going to be this strong military hero that would smite Rome and appoint Jerusalem as the throne of the entire world. Well, that's not what Jesus was doing. And they're all focused on their own greatness and how they're going to fit into this world of greatness and how they're going to use their strength and their might so they can make right and prove how good they are, because how strong they are and how wonderful they are and how everybody loves them. And Jesus says, no. In fact, see the little child right there? That's who you need to welcome. And this is where the challenge comes. Oftentimes, churches fail miserably in welcome. We think we're good. In fact, you go to 20 different churches, and you will have 20 churches say something to the effect, we're a friendly church, we're a welcoming church, we're a loving church, because no church wants to think of themselves as being unwelcoming, unloving, and unfriendly, right? Can we agree with this? But how many churches don't really know how to welcome the stranger? How many of us, at some point in our experience, and I know some of you in this room can certainly relate to this because we've shared this together, you've been told to leave a church because of the behavior that the church didn't like. Maybe it was you, maybe it was somebody with part of your family or some of us have experienced that scorn or that shame. And it's natural. I remember, 20-something years ago, I was in a church service. I wasn't preaching that day. I was in the congregation, and we had a special guest preacher, and my daughter Celeste, most of you know Celeste, was 2 years old. And you know what she was doing? She was behaving like a 2-year-old. Have you ever had a 2-year-old behave like a 2-year-old in church? Well, I was also sitting on the front row. And it reached a point where I could hear the murmurs behind me, and I knew that it was time to pick her up and take her out of the sanctuary before she disrupted everybody. And that was when I got schooled. I got about halfway down the center aisle when the preacher stopped mid-sermon and said, "Don't you take that baby out of church." And I was just kind of mortified for a minute. And I took a step back, and the preacher again said, "No, Jesus wants her in this church. I don't care if she's behaving like a toddler. Jesus wants her in this church. And if the people around you don't like the noise she's making, that's their problem, not hers. You keep that baby in church." The preacher was the Reverend Jesse Jackson, so you kind of just have to wonder. You don't argue with him. But it was a powerful moment for me because I realized at that moment that I was so concerned with being right and making sure that I don't offend anybody around me, that I was negating a passage of Scripture that I believed in. Bring the children to Christ. And when we talk about welcoming, we do this because we don't always get to understand others. Yesterday, in fact, while I was finishing up this sermon, a friend of mine contacted me on Facebook, and she said, "Dave, I need your help because I don't know what to do." And so I went and looked at the stream. Well, as Facebook can be well known for, it had gotten into a heated religious political argument. And she had one opinion, and this other person had another opinion, and the opinions were absolutely irreconcilable, and she didn't know what to say, but she just felt in her heart she was right. And I don't think she liked my answer because I basically said, "Y'all are both wrong." But the point of the matter was, as with so many of these political, religious arguments that happen nowadays, we're not welcoming one another. We're trying to shout one another down. We see somebody that's different, somebody that we don't understand, somebody whose look, their lifestyle, their accent, their dress is different than what we would consider normal, and therefore we categorize them rather than embrace them. And it's no different than the people of Jesus' day who said, "You know what, the children don't matter. What's important is that the adult men are in charge, and let's just keep it that way." And Jesus says, "No. Let the little children come to me." So when I talk about welcoming God, or welcoming people, or welcoming in the name of Christ, what I'm really talking about is not the politeness of welcome. "Oh yeah, come on in, have a seat, here, have a cookie." It's not the superficial friendliness. "Oh, well, we're a friendly church. Happy us. Woohoo!" But what it really boils down to is radical hospitality. Radical hospitality. And hospitality is more than just say, hey, yeah, come on in. Hospitality is more than just saying, hey, have a cookie. Hospitality is, let me get to know you. Tell me your story. Let me understand who you are, as much as you are willing to share. You can't be forced, but to be willing to truly listen to where someone's coming from. And part of that means we have to stop thinking about ourselves long enough to truly hear who somebody else is. There are a lot of people in this world that I don't like.
Why?
Usually it's because they have a political or religious opinion that I find to be inconsistent with mine. But I've found over and over and over and over again, if myself and that individual are willing to sit down and understand one another, we can find that shared humanity that lies underneath all of the political facades and the religious barriers that we like to put up to make ourselves feel great. And that's what hospitality is about. It's about taking down that facade and saying, tell me about you. I'd like to learn. Darlene said, the teacher sits down to teach. And what happens when we go to the table? We sit down. And that's when we begin to truly learn. And that is where welcoming God takes place. Thanks be to God. And amen.